There we go. So welcome. I'm really glad that you're here with me today. This webinar is 3 things you can do today to transform conflict. And I know a couple of folks, some of you were registered for the April webinar. So I just want to be really clear, same title, different topics. So if you were part of that one, we're going to cover some different things today. So I want to acknowledge with a deep respect and gratitude that I am on the traditional, unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Today, I'm in a place that settlers know it as Ottawa. And so that's where I'm talking to you from. So I wanted to give you just a little background on why these webinars. And I'll just tell you, it's because in my practice, I spend a lot of time talking to people about really complex topics, about how to bring people together, how to grow culture, how to improve performance, how to transform conflict. And I find that my resilience is better when I'm in community. And so these webinars were born out of a desire to be in community, really just to have a conversation with other people doing this work, wanting to grow their skills, to be together. So it's not a webinar like I'm going to lecture at you. It's more of a, here's a question, here's a couple things to think about, if you have some answers. So if you're here live and you want to unmute yourself and just join in, or you'd rather use chat, you participate however it works for you. And then of course, just know that people who also register will get the recording of this session. So really these webinars are born out of my desire to be in community, having these conversations with other people. So I want to start here with introductions. And you, as I said, participate how you are most comfortable. But I think it's really important that when we're talking about hard things, that we center our humanity, not our title or our role or our positions or our geography, but more just something about ourselves so we can see each other as human beings. And that creates that spark of connection, and it also creates an opening between us rather than a barrier between us. So I can start something about me personally. It's summer. We do have some folks in the southern hemisphere who have registered, so it would be winter for them, but for me it's summer, and I tend to take a lot of time off in the summer, and mostly I'm at our cottage. I live there most of the time. And so while I've been gardening and swimming and riding my bike, I have been thinking lots. There's been lots and lots of space in my head. And I have found that I've had so many conversations in the last couple of months that are people calling because they say, oh, well, there's anger or there's conflict. But really what they're talking about is a yearning to be seen, a yearning to be heard, a really deep desire to be better connected in their organization or in their community or in their life even. And so that's a thing about me. I am bringing that to today's conversation, that real desire for connection. And so that's something about me. So I'll just leave the space open, something you would like to tell us about yourself as a human being. You can pop it into chat. Thank you, Jocelyn. You are a mom, a daughter, a partner, and a lover of crocheting. I think that's fantastic. And I'll just leave the space for anyone else who wants to offer, and just know it's an opportunity, not an obligation.
I guess I'll pop in, Stephanie. I'm having, I think it's internal issues with the camera because my employer doesn't let us use Zoom, and there's some firewalls that I'm leaping over here. But no, I kind of always focused on self-reliance. I appreciate the help of others, but I like to learn things myself. But I also like to share the things I learn so people can grow in some ways from those experiences.
That's
And that
beautiful.
that's both work and home.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, David. I wish we could see your face, but
So,
I understand the restraints of firewalls. But yeah,
yeah, my camera's showing that it's on, but I know it's not according to my
yeah,
screen. But
yeah, yeah. Thank you very much for sharing. Anybody else? Something about you as a human being. Tanya, go for it.
It's Tanya Zwalin, and I'm calling from Rochester, New York. Um, Stephanie, I took a training in January 2020 or 2019, um, of managing opposition and outrage, and
Mm.
it was in Halifax, and it was a wonderful experience. And today I'm coming in after a vacation that was not relaxing, and coming home to an ill dog, and just turning the corner on the ill dog, and having like deep gratitude for just the moment this webinar is turning up, and that I have capacity and space to like open my being for learning. And so I'm looking forward to being here today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Tanya. That's really, really beautiful. Thank you. And I'm glad that the dog is turning the corner, so you've got more space for this. Yeah, they're like our fur family. So yeah. Thank you, folks. So like I said, as we go through this, I'll ask you questions. So it's all an opportunity, not an obligation to respond or to share. And you can always use chat as well if you prefer. One of the things I want to point you to is that asking a question like that when we begin creates something we call attunement or alignment, because we all have a basic need to be seen, right? It takes that moment and it communicates, I get you, or you're safe here, or I see you. And without attunement or alignment, we're just using tools, right? We're just kind of checking the box. We're applying a method. We're asking a funky icebreaker, right? But it all often feels very surface level. And so what we're trying to do, and it's in the space of conflict, but it's actually in the space of human development, in our ability to perform better in our lives and our work and in our communities, is this need for attunement and alignment. When we are connected, we are more capable. And so I just kind of want to point you to the thinking behind why asking you not to introduce yourself with role or position or title, but something about you. So we center humanity. And that Carl Jung quote that you can know all the theories, master all the techniques, but as you touch a human soul, be just another human soul, is the essence of, a really deep-seated human need that we have. So this webinar is based on the premise that in transforming conflict or creating a shift or bringing people together, really the only thing you can control is yourself. And sometimes we think big about politics and systems change, and all of that stuff is important and it's admirable and it takes an enormous amounts of energy. But sometimes redirecting your attention to your kitchen table or your boardroom table or to your neighbor across the street is all you can actually influence and control. And so that's our focus today, is simple, easy stuff you can walk away and you can implement in your life. So in the April webinar, we followed the same flow. We did a check-in, we talked about leadership, because what we're talking about are leadership competencies, our ability to work with conflict or show up differently. And then we took a couple quick, easy, uncomplicated approaches. And then we had questions, ideas, and sharing. The three things that we talked about in April were ask good questions, learn something new, so to expand your own capacity inside your head and your cognitive competence, and talk to a stranger. Now today we're going to talk about three different things: how to create connection and build relationships, so this applies in your life, your work, your community; how to slow down your own emotions, so your own reactivity, and how to create a practice of talking together, right? Based on the premise that just like going to the gym, the more you do it, the stronger those muscles get. So those are the three things that we're going to focus on in today's session. And I'm going to ask you questions and offer some thoughts, but it's not, like I said earlier, sort of a lecture, like here's the theory and now you go off and do it. It's just really intended to be a conversation. So those are today's three topics. So wait, I'll just pause and see if anyone has any questions about the topics we're going to cover or the topics we did cover before. In follow-up, I'll make sure you get that link to the April webinar. So if you didn't attend it, you can go back and watch it. So I'll just pause. Any questions, comments before we kind of roll in? All right. So I said earlier that these things that we're doing, these skills that we're implementing, they are leadership competencies, because leadership is not solely defined by your position, role, hierarchy, or title, especially if you're in a very hierarchical organization. Leadership is a way of acting. So, taking action, accomplishing things, and a way of thinking. So mindset and perspective. And those two things combined, they bring out the best in other people and they bring out the best in yourself. So I don't think about leadership like it's a title. It's actually a way of working and operating in the world. Now, if you've taken webinars with me before, you know that I define competency. So that's what we're doing, is growing leadership competencies as a skill. So that's the things you do, as knowledge, the things you know, and a way of being. So that's the ways you show up, your mindset or your perspective. And all three of those things are required to be a competent leader. Sometimes people focus on the skills, right? What are the things I can do? Sometimes people think about, oh, how expert are they? What are the things they know? But all three things are required to be an effective leader. Things you do, things you know, and the ways in which you show up and interact with others in the world. Now, a thing that's really core to the three topics we're going to talk about today is that leaders take responsibility for their impact. And I want to get really clear on the distinction between intention and impact. So an intention is about you. So for example, right, if you were to say, I wanted to talk to you about your performance and highlight what you could do differently if it was a work situation. But if you said that, the impact of that conversation could be that the person ended up feeling maybe blamed, or like they have little value on their team, and actually their performance could decline instead of improve. If you explain your intention, which was to talk to them about their performance and highlight what they could do differently, it doesn't change the impact. It doesn't improve their performance. It doesn't make them feel valued. It doesn't make them feel like, this is not all their fault. So impact is the thing we need to take responsibility for. So we might need to acknowledge or apologize or ask questions about the situation or the experience the person has had that led to the situation. We want to take responsibility for our impact. And when we do that, we build relationship and we create the potential to solve problems together. And the interesting result of that is that people perform better. So it's just a really important distinction to pull apart. Leaders take responsibility for their impact, not their intention. You can have the best of intentions and you can have really challenging or negative impacts. And so we look to see, how are we affecting others and how are we affecting the space of the conversations that we're having? And that's the thing we take responsibility for, versus, well, we intended to bring people together, or we intended to increase performance, or we intended to make sure people felt heard. If none of those things actually happened, then we need to take responsibility for them and choose different approaches, which is why skills, knowledge, and ways of being are all equally as important. So those those kind of ideas are the premise of the three things that we'll talk about today. So I want to start with create connection and build relationships. And so you've heard me say this before. Anyone who's done any work with me or read my book or attended a webinar has heard me say this before, that when we have brave, honest conversations, we create connection, we deepen understanding, we strengthen relationship, and we grow trust. That's because the conversation is the conduit to those four things. And the thing that's really interesting about it is that when those four things are present, we can solve any problem. And when those four things are not present, we can accomplish just about nothing. Those four things are core in our life, our work, our community, to being able to be innovative and creative and solve problems and be connected and deepen understanding and all of those things. They're the conduit in the conversation. So core to that is that in relationships, there has to be trust. So that's my question for you. What builds trust in your relationships? Think about the relationships in your life, in your work, when you're working with community or stakeholders. What builds trust in your relationships? I'll just give you a moment to think about that. I welcome input out loud. Thank you. Yeah. Or in chat. Thank you. Authenticity. Absolutely, right? Showing up as a whole person. Yeah, bringing your whole self to the relationship, to the conversation. Even just showing up, Jocelyn, I really love that, right? Like just being present, just stepping in. Yeah. What else? What else grows relationship and builds trust? Being vulnerable. Absolutely, David. Yeah, totally. Like having the courage to say what you need or what you have experienced or what isn't working for you or what you're yearning for. All of those things. Yeah. Asking the hard questions that elicit that input from other people. Anything else come to mind? I think especially about ways of being that I think empathy builds trust. And so it's not a taking a walk in someone else's shoes, it's actually being beside someone when they are experiencing emotion so that they are not alone. I think honesty is core to building trust, right? And that holds hands with vulnerability and authenticity. So consistency, I really love that, Tanya, right? The same thing. People become to rely on how you're showing up and interacting with them and that you're keeping your promises. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's an element of humility as well that builds trust. And it goes to that taking responsibility for impact, versus, kind of thinking about your intention. So I think it's just it's the opportunity to be really real and open in your relationships and to have the courage to engage well. I think it's interesting because it's like there's an order with which these things happen. So sometimes people wait for trust to be present before they are vulnerable or authentic or honest. But the thing that happens actually is that when we wait, then there's barriers, and actually everybody's waiting, and there is no trust. So it's like vulnerability and honesty and authenticity have got to come first in order for trust to be built, right? And that's quite counterintuitive. Sometimes we're waiting until we trust someone for that to be and for us to feel like we can share, but actually it's the act of sharing that creates the trust. So I'm just going to play a super short video by Simon Sinek, and I'm sure you're familiar with his work. He's done loads of work, but mostly in the space of human development. People talk about leadership and performance, but he's actually working in the space of human development. And I want you to just listen and think about what are you taking away from this story about trust and relationships. Well, hold on a second. Can you hear it? Just one sec. I push the buttons. Volume's up. Okay, we'll just do it one more time. Can't hear him? I can't hear him either. Hmm. It's really weird. It's really okay, let me do it one more time. I don't know if it's an internet connection thing. It's like the connection is kind of sketchy. Hold on. Nope. Okay. Well, we'll stop playing with it. I'll send you the link in the follow-up email. What he says in this 2-minute video is that when he shows up with his team and is honest about his own struggles, the things he's not good at, the things that are impacting how he works with them, the things that are hard for him in his life at this particular moment, he finds that they then share the same thing back, and their connection is stronger, but also their work performance together is stronger. They're more creative, they're more resilient, they're more able to rely on each other, right? It's that just basic premise, which is quite counterintuitive, that, where if we focus only on the task, then we'll perform better. It's actually when we focus on the relationship that we perform better. We're more connected, and our relationships, our organizations are stronger. So you couldn't hear that. I'm just going to pause and see if there's anyone has any experiences or stories that connect to that idea. I'm just going to read your comment, Jocelyn. Wondering if you can also layer vulnerability, and with time it grows deeper because of that relationship and that trust. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a fantastic book by Daniel Coyle called The Culture Code. Has anybody read that? And okay, so it says that there are 3 foundations of high performing companies. The first one is purpose, right? So everyone knows the why we're doing this work, and their own personal values are in alignment with that why. But then there is vulnerability and sharing as a foundation of high performing companies, and then safety. So that's that consistency over time. When we show up and we say those things, when we explain what we're struggling with, when we share that, we're not good at this and we need some help, when we ask for support, that we can come to rely on the consistency that's present in that. And so absolutely, Jocelyn, that's that layering of the more we do it over and over again, the better we get at it, and the more we create this deepening of a relationship. Jocelyn.
I guess I have a question about if those 3 things don't exist in your organization, you can only do so much with yourself and your interactions.
Yeah.
But at the broader level, there is kind of that mistrust because there isn't a value on relationship. And how do you change that in the context of building relationship with community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And so I don't have a simple answer for you, but I guess what I would offer is that I think it's about systems change over time. So first, it's the things you can control, right? How are you modeling your interactions? How are you showing up? How are you demonstrating to people that, the environment you're trying to create inside your organization and outside of your organization? And then how are you creating opportunities to just kind of hold up the mirror? Because if you're an organization that is focused externally on building relationships and trust with community or stakeholders, and you don't have that inside the organization, the status of your relationship externally is always going to mirror what's happening internally. Where there are barriers, where there is like a hierarchical or an expert-driven culture, where relationships are not prized, where there's little trust, that's always going to mirror in the community. And so the first, maybe the opportunity is to just ask questions and have a conversation. But really what you're talking about is a culture change journey. It's a recognition, and sometimes the impetus for that change is a crisis. So oftentimes organizations, either internally, there's a crisis of performance, or, strikes, or, finances, or just not being able to meet goals, or it happens externally with a perception of the organization is ineffective or untrustworthy. And sometimes that crisis is the catalyst to kind of examine how could we do better. What doesn't work is sort of the projection or the blame or the we're not doing this right, because that it has the same effect in every human relationship, right? If you feel blamed or like it's your fault, then you're not going to be really interested in changing behaviors to get different results. And the other thing too is that it's not, no one's born knowing how to have challenging conversations, or a lot of that has been trained out of us, right? In structures that are about linear decision making and hierarchy, and primarily dealing with, complicated issues versus complex systems. So we think, if we just have the expert answer, we can solve the problem, and then feelings will get out of the way. But that's not really how human beings work, and that's not actually how our systems and structures that we're part of work either. That's a really great question, Jocelyn. Really great question. Okay, I'm going to try and play one more video. We'll see if it works again. If not, I'll tell you what he's saying and I'll send you the link. And this video is by a guy named James Gill. And he works in conflict transformation, but primarily in small groups, like couples or, work teams. So I'm just going to reset it. Let's see. Nope, you can't hear it, can you? I don't even understand it. I played all these this morning. Okay, here's what we are going to do. I'm going to play it because you can read it. He's got closed caption. So I'm just going to reset it, and I'll just turn the mute off, and you can close caption what he's saying. So we'll just start it again from the beginning. Okay. Okay. Hopefully you were able to read that. He's talking about the distinction between experience and projection. And interestingly enough, projection is easier. It's easier to do, right? It's easier to feel these feelings and then say, okay, well, it's your fault. you're bad. You're actually totally bad. It's not just your behaviors that are challenging for me, right? It's that you are this kind of person. It's a dehumanizing experience. And it, of course, damages relationship. But it is grounded in valid feelings and emotions and experiences. And so the thing to think about is that when we want to grow relationships, we have got to be vulnerable with what our own experience is. So if our experience is that I'm not feeling, like my efforts are valued and I'm really struggling, to find a role to play on this team, or I'm not feeling like I'm being heard and I don't know how to make my voice, be reflected. That's taking all those ways of being we talked about that build trust in relationships. That's about being brave. It's about being open and honest and authentic and vulnerable. When we go to that next step and then turn it around and kind of project it at someone, we damage the relationships. And it's an incredibly common thing to do. It's incredibly common, and it happens in our work relationships and in our community, and it happens constantly on social media. So people feel something and then they turn it around and launch it like a cannon, and it will damage relationships every time. So what we want is the opposite of that, right? We want to ground ourselves in sharing experience, even sharing experience through story, which creates connection and builds relationship. So I'll just pause and see if there's any questions or kind of highlights or insights, if you can think about an example or a situation where that resonates or makes sense for you.
I think I either got this from one of your courses before, Steph, or from somebody who took it, and it comes back to intention and impact. And when I feel that X is creating a toxic environment, I think the way to approach it is to ask that person, this is how I felt. Is this what your intention was?
Mm-hmm.
That type of scenario, to clarify what your meaning is. And I know in all situations it may not be easy to ask that, but it's better to clarify, I think, than to just assume that this was their intent and this was the impact on me, instead of clarifying, did you mean this when you said it? Because this is how I interpret it.
Yeah, I really love that, David, because when I shared how important it is that leaders take responsibility for impact, what you've shared is that when you are impacted, you can take responsibility for that as well, and say, and step into that courage and into vulnerability. And it also opens the door by saying, here's how I was impacted. Was that your intent? It assumes the best of other people. And it allows them to then take responsibility for it, right? It opens the conversation. It creates that conduit for deeper understanding. That's lovely. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I love, because it also is reciprocal. How do we, it's not all the onus and responsibility is not just on us. It's also on us when we are impacted ourselves. Okay, let me layer one more element onto the ways in which we show up, the ways of being that support us to build trust in relationships, or that don't. And it goes to the nature and quality of our conversations. And so what we want to do, in addition to sharing experience versus projecting and being honest and vulnerable and open and focused on building trust, is that we ideally want to have transformational conversations versus transactional conversations, or at least as many transformational conversations as we do transactional conversations. And so this is a series of examples that are noted in my book, but I want to, as I read them, I want you to see if you can see your life in them. Because the distinction is really clear. So discussions about to-do lists and errands to run and who will pick up the children from school versus discussions about how I'm feeling lonely and I miss you, even though we are in this house together. There are conversations that generate lists about deliverables, due dates, times, and tasks versus how we leverage our individual strengths to do good work that makes us feel a sense of purpose and accomplishment, like our contributions matter and we have value. There are discussions about construction impacts of building light rail and when night work will be scheduled and decibels of loud noises versus conversations about how the baby is up all night and work from home has become impossible with no respite from the noise and mental health is suffering in the community. And so the thing I want to point out is that we are talking about the same topic, but we are totally missing each other like ships in the night. When we have transformational conversations, we are peeling back the layers past tasks and to-do lists and facts and data, and we're focusing on the human being underneath. Now, I'm not saying that tasks and to-do lists and data aren't important conversations to have. I mean, you probably, if you have children, do have to have a discussion on who's picking them up from school. So I'm not saying don't have those conversations, but do have the underlying conversations that answer the whys of how are we connected? How are we in this together? How, do we bring out the best in each other? Those are transformational conversations, and they make us all better in our lives and our work and in our organization. And sometimes, especially when things are busy and there's lots of stress, we get really stuck in the transactional conversations, the conversations about the to-do lists and the tasks and all the rest of it, rather than the other things that matter most. And so I'll just pause and see if you have examples of where you've gotten stuck in a transactional conversation, or how you have focused on a transformational conversation. And you don't need to share them out loud if you don't want to, but just think about the difference in your life when those things are possible. So I'll just kind of summarize the idea of this very first thing on how we transform conflict by just kind of noting the things of how we do this. How do we build relationship, build trust, create connection? I think the very first thing we have to do is be brave, right? Be brave enough to be vulnerable, be brave enough to step into the discomfort. We have to kind of just choose to step forward. I think it's important we ask ourselves, why are we doing this, right? We have to be motivated by creating connection, by deepening understanding, by building trust. Otherwise, sometimes we can find ourselves in these conversations motivated by being right, by being certain, by being the expert. And so even just evaluating and asking yourself, why am I doing this? And what's the impact I want to have? It's important that if we're clear on why we're doing this to build relationship, then we watch our own reaction to distinguishing between experience and projection, right? That we're standing clearly in our own experience rather than, kind of weaponizing it and turning it into projection or blame or shame. And then we want to recognize that transactional conversations matter, and that if those are the only conversations we have, we don't strengthen relationship or build trust at all. So those kind of 4 premises are how we create connection and we grow relationships. I'm just gonna go to chat. Thank you, Tanya, for your comments. Sometimes it feels easier to make the lists and do the things. Yeah. It is. It's harder to say how we feel, especially when we don't know how it will be received. It is so very, very true. It goes to that, get brave and step into it. Because if you step in and say it, then at least you'll know, right? You'll have an answer. If you don't, there's no guarantee that it will be received the way you want. But if you don't say it, the possibility will never be realized. Also, some of us were raised not to talk about how we feel. Yeah, 100%. I think most of us were raised not to talk about how we feel. I think my children might be the exception, partly because I was raised to, not talk about how I feel. It was like under the carpet and nailed down really hard. And so my children would probably say the opposite, like, oh, here we go again, talking about our feelings. And, but most of us, that's not been our experience. And in our work cultures, in our lives, in our communities, those things are not present. And yet, or are not always present, or they're present in pockets. And yet human beings have feelings, right? You are not human unless you have feelings. And actually, that's how we make meaning. And so normalizing it and creating space for it actually increases our capability and our ability to develop. Yeah, Jocelyn. Yeah, using I statements. And that's really core to that distinguishing between experience and projection, right? Because projection is all about you and experience is all about I. And watching yourself, catching yourself when that happens. Okay, so that's kind of thing number one. I'm going to go to thing number two. So thing number two is slow down your own emotions. And because I think a thing that's so true is that when you have conflict, you always have emotion, right? They go hand in hand. And all you can control is your own response. You certainly can't control someone else's response. And I think it's really important to know you might be able to influence someone else's response, but really the only thing you can manage is your own reactivity. And all you can model is what you hope to see from others. And I think it's so important to know that conflict is part of life, right? I think as well as being socialized that we don't talk about our feelings, I think we're also socialized that conflict is bad. And actually, conflict is a source of innovation. It is a source of understanding. It's a source of that trust and relationship that grows performance and innovation, right? It's all of those things. And so it can create solutions to really challenging problems. But it always comes with emotion because people are impacted, right? Or they're fearful of impacts. And so the only thing we can control is our own reactions, which could invite that brave, honest conversation. So here's my question for you. How do you slow down your own reactions now? What works for you? So what do you do that slows those kind of bursts or flares of anger or fear or anxiety or despair? What do you do now that works for you? And I'll just hold the space a little bit if anyone wants to share.
Two things helped me, and one was working for 7 years as a youth worker and having to keep my cool all the time when a lot of crap was happening and a lot of attacks on you personally because there was nobody else to attack, and the kids need to get that release out, that it's not me, it's the experience that they had and being able to develop that thick skin over the years. And another one was in when I worked for safety for a long time. I had to go to court quite often. So that logic and sticking to the facts and being able to keep your cool while being on the stand, those experiences, those were key to my growth.
Thank you so much for sharing those experiences, David. And really challenging situations where you would have to just kind of be calm and, as peaceful as possible and as steady as possible. I want to thank you, Jocelyn and Tanya, for putting your comments in chat, right? Taking those deep breaths. Circular breathing, I assume that's box breathing, but Jocelyn, would you tell us what circular breathing is for you?
No, it is that box, but it's not just one time. It's you know, taking the time that you need and acknowledging that to the folks that you're with as well. I've found that that acknowledgement is always hard to do because you feel like you're supposed to have an answer or response right away. And, you know, allowing yourself and others to kind of take that moment is hard, but
Yeah.
valuable.
Absolutely. And it sets context too, right? And I think it also introduces or supports that centering of humanity, right? It says, I'm struggling, but I'm staying here in this conversation, and I just need a moment to breathe. And or let's take a pause. If we could take a pause for a couple of minutes and all take some deep breaths because things are getting heated, right? It invites the being together in a challenging conversation, and it calms your own nervous system as well. And of course, the somatic responses, right, in our bodies, we experience emotion first, well before we've cognitively assigned a label to it or decided what it is, right? So that swirling stomach, that, that kind of that warm flush in your chest, the sweaty hands in your armpits, right? All those things tell you you're having an emotion, you're experiencing a response, and that is happening in your body. And so tuning into them, actually feeling them, creates an opportunity to understand them. Now, we need to soothe ourselves. Think about like the way a baby cries, and when we pick it up, it calms. Well, ideally, it does, right? It's those soothing things that create opportunities for us to soothe our own emotions as well. So things like box breathing, things like grounding yourself, right? Planting your feet over and over again on the floor, in the ground, kind of creates this pacing and slows yourself down and also grounds you as you do that. I often put my hand on my chest, on my heart. And as I take my breaths, I can feel my heart. Often, if I'm sad or my heart is tender, it creates that comfort, and sometimes I pat. And you can be doing that in the middle of a challenging conversation, and no one will be wondering, oh, what's going on there, right? You just are listening deeply, and at the same time, you're calming your own reaction. I'm going to try one more time to play one video. And I've only got myself connected to the Ethernet cable, so I'm just going to see if I add the Wi-Fi for some reason, that increases things. And I'm just going to try one more video. And it's a lovely little "How do you calm yourself" video. All right. Can you hear it? All right. Okay, okay, this one's also closed captions. So let's see if I can share it and you can read it. Let me just reset it. Okay, this is Dan Harris. There, you can see at the bottom. I think it's unfortunate he doesn't want anyone to see him actually doing it. So not the message you necessarily want people to walk away with, but the method that he's sharing is incredibly effective to calm yourself down. And it's that self-compassion opportunity. I when I am, entering a really challenging conversation, when my kids were little, I may have told this story in a previous webinar. When my kids were little, and they were struggling, I used to say to them the thing that Christopher Robin always says to Winnie the Pooh: you are smart, you are strong, you are brave, you can do anything. And so when I am really struggling and I am feeling my own reactions build, I say that to myself: you are smart, you are strong, you are brave, you can do anything. And I actually up here above my desk have a little sticky note my 25-year-old wrote and stuck above my desk. And it says, you are smart, you are strong, you are brave. And it just sits there as a reminder, right, that life is hard sometimes and you need people in your corner, but you also need yourself in your corner to calm your own reactivity. And if you can talk to yourself the way you would talk to your children, or to a family member that you love, or a partner, or your dog, you will find the opportunity to just kind of slow everything down. And then you're not reacting and escalating the conflict. You're creating the space for that brave, honest conversation and that deeper understanding. So here's just to summarize those couple of things we just talked about. Take a deep breath, put your hand on your heart and talk to yourself with kindness, really, like you are a close friend. Ask yourself some curious, kind questions. And so this is the other thing that I do when I am reacting. It's like observer mind. Just take a breath and step back from where you are and ask yourself some questions about what's going on for you, right? Tune in to what's going on in your body and ask yourself questions like, what is happening right now, right? Okay, I'm feeling like I'm going to throw up. Well, what am I experiencing? What you're trying to do is create that pause for yourself, that instead of escalating in your emotional response, you are slowing it all down. What's going on for me around this issue? What emotions are rising up for me? What path to meaning might those emotions give me? What unresolved issues are showing up for me in this relationship or this topic? Like, this person is talking about this, but I'm doing the, oh, you always or you never, right? I'm bringing in all history to this situation. What's motivating my reactions, right? Is it coming from a place of loss or fear or insecurity or something else? Like, do I want to be right? Do I want to be certain? What am I committed to in this moment, in this interaction or situation? What do I believe in? What do I think is possible? What do I hope for? And what do I need to let go of? How do I stay in this moment without judgment, assumption, or critique of myself or other? And so those are a list of questions. And sometimes when I'm preparing for a challenging conversation or to lead a really challenging session, I actually write, 5 or 6 of them down and I put them in front of me so that I can pull back into observer mind as I'm listening if I feel a reaction building in myself. And sometimes I say context too, like, I wonder if we could take a break. Let's take 1 minute and just kind of ask ourselves, what is going on for me right now? What is causing, this feeling that I'm having, so that you can invite others into the conversation to do the same. Which means then you're in it together, right? If you're both having an emotion, then you can de-escalate together. Or if you and 20 other people are having that experience, you're collectively recognizing that this is a hard topic to talk about and we want to do it together. So I'll just stop there before I go on to thing number 3 and just check and see if there's questions or comments or anything that rises up for you. All right, let's talk about thing number 3. I want to create a practice of talking together based on the premise that the more we do these things, right, the stronger the muscle gets. And so let's start here. How, where, and when could you build the muscle of talking together about things that matter? And Jocelyn kind of asked this question, or maybe this is a question that builds on the thing that you said earlier, right? What happens when you work in an organization where those things aren't talked about, where there isn't vulnerability, where you don't have those kinds of conversations, and yet you're trying to have those conversations with the community? So how, where, and when could you build that muscle of talking together about things that matter? And you think of examples, right? We're making this really practical and tangible. The more we talk about hard things together, the more capable we are to solve our problems, right? The more connected, the better understanding we have. So when you think about your organization or your community or your family system, what would it look like if you were to do this more often? What are some examples of things you could do? Therapy. That's good, Dania. Absolutely. And that is true, actually, right? When we take responsibility to unpack our own stories and experiences and learn from them, absolutely. Therapy is I highly recommend it. Absolutely. Okay, here's some other tangible things that you could do. You could do team check-ins at the start of every staff meeting, for example, or at the start of every project team meeting. Simple things like, okay, what's something we need to know about you as a human being before we dive into talking about these issues, right? So questions that create connection. You could do action learning, so debriefs, right? What did you witness or observe or see or feel on this project so far? What has insight or meaning for you? You know, what do we do with that knowledge? How do we move forward together? So questions that connect meaning and feeling together to kind of create a repository of lessons. So those kind of after action debriefs, those mid project debriefs, you could slow down your conversations. Try not to have packed agendas. Try to only have one topic so that you can get deep enough and everyone is heard, right? So it kind of goes to the distinction between transactional and transformational. If the faster we're moving, the less transformational we are. We need space and time in our heads and in our hearts to create connection. And so if you've got one really big important thing to talk about, only have that one big important thing. Don't have 20 things on your agenda because you won't deepen things. Create time and space for regular check-ins. So the start of team meetings, the start of calls, of group calls, the start of your community meetings, at your dinner table, for example, like what was the best and the hardest part of your day today? Create these patterns of interaction that invite vulnerability, that invite sharing, that invite connection. And then recognize you don't have to do this all the time, right? You're choosing the time and place for these things, right? If you suddenly go from all transactional conversations to all transformational conversations that are focused on, vulnerability, people are also going to be all uncomfortable. So you don't need to don't need to focus on building connection and relationship constantly, but you do need to start making new and different patterns. Thank you very much for the link, David. I'll click on it after and have a look at it. I think it's like I think it's Malcolm Gladwell who said, right, you need 10,000 hours invested in something to become an expert. What we want to do is create this practice so that it becomes who we are. So Brendan Bouchard is another like leadership guru. And so he kind of works through the flow of it, right? First, you have an intention, which is a goal about you. Then you have a behavior, so the action you take to make that goal real. Then you have a habit because you've done it again and again and again. But then it becomes a practice because you can't imagine how you would operate without it, right? It's core or a foundation to the way you work. And it becomes second nature, like you don't think about, oh, I should add this to the team meeting. It's just how you run a team meeting. It's how you sit together at the dinner table. And then it is who you are. That's where we're going for, that this way of working together, this way of talking together becomes part of how we do our work, of how we engage. Is anyone familiar with the work of the Gottman Institute? Yeah, a nodding head or two. Okay, so anyways, they are relationship counselors, but everything they teach applies to our work in organizations and also in communities. But they talk about how many positive interactions do we have compared to how many negative interactions, because that overall colors our perception of the state of the relationship and, of course, impacts the state of trust. And our ability to work together. So basically, they say if we have the best relationships with the highest levels of trust and collaboration, have got a ratio of 20-1. So 20 positive interactions to 1 negative one. And relationships that survive or function sufficiently for collaboration or problem solving have a ratio of at least 5-1. When you dip below 5 positive interactions compared to 1 negative one, you're a relationship at risk or fractured. And so that results in our perception. So for example, I'm in Ottawa right now, and I think about my relationship as a citizen or a resident of the city of Ottawa. I would say my negative interactions compared to my positive interactions with the city, the municipality, are about 10,000-1. And so my entire experience with the city is negative. The way they run their projects, the way they inform residents, the way they invite conversations, the way they communicate. And yet they could change their tune tomorrow and do everything with vulnerability and sharing and kindness and collaboration. And I would have to overcome my previous perception. It would take me a long time to shift from thinking about them negatively to thinking about them positively. And so that's why this ratio really, really matters, because it becomes ingrained the story of how we see the relationship. And so just thinking about in your organization, like I'm working with an organization right now, has a fair bit of conflict inside the organization. And they actually came to me for training. I said, after they explained to me all the things that were going on, I said, I don't think a 2-day training is going to shift your organizational culture. Like what you really need to do is shift the culture away from negativity to one of collaboration and sharing and purpose and goal setting. And that's a big journey. That's a really big journey. And when that negativity becomes ingrained, that becomes the pattern of how we interact, right? We get together and complain about something, or we get together and criticize something, or even, or we criticize each other rather than, we go to projection rather than to experience our story. And so this pattern of working really matters. It really matters. So we want to build new habits. We want to operationalize and incorporate the ways we're talking to each other that are positive, that are transformational, that are grounded in vulnerability, that build trust. And we want to do it at our dinner tables, at our staff meetings, with our neighbors. So we tip the scale towards positivity. And I think those are things we can control, right? We can't necessarily control, who's going to win which election or what is being said on social media, but we can control the actions that we take in the relationships that we do have. And those are sometimes the only thing we can control, right? And when we want to invite, I don't know, a different kind of world, sometimes it's just the baby steps we take, like the one thing at a time that kind of tips us toward that. So that's sort of the end of it. That's thing 1, 2, and 3. I'm just going to stop there. I am grateful for an hour of conversation, and I'm just going to kind of open up the door. Who's got questions? Who has stories? Who's got comments? What do you need before we close?
Just to thank you.
You're welcome, David. Thank you for being here. I'm really grateful for that.
I take away so much each time, but it is this, how do you tip the scale? And, you know, when you bring in positivity, somebody else is bringing in positivity, and it makes every day better.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you that somebody to rely on and somebody to connect with, and then it's the 2 of you or the 4 of you, or, and it over time does make a difference.
It does. Yeah, absolutely, Jocelyn. Yeah, it's like those ripples, right? You drop a rock in a pond and those ripples carry out. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm so glad you're joining me for the advanced course in August. I'm so glad.
Just wait
Tanya,
until you see the case study.
I'm teaching a level 3 advanced course in August on strategies for complex engagement. So it goes to all the systems and structures and patterns of interaction, right? Like in that complex space where it's really hard to solve things. So yeah. How about you, Tanya?
Yeah, I have a lot to think about, a lot of notes, and I think what I'm reflecting on is that's just sometimes there's a resistance to move into this softer space in practice, and talk about just methods and scopes of work and what's next and schedules and budgets, and I just I appreciate every time I interact with you, there's the pause and this how much space you give to all the other things that people are bringing into the room. And I think, going back to, I sort of said therapy as a joke, but I think in order for us to show up as leaders, we've got to be in tune and in touch with ourselves. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It just is. I'm really grateful for an hour of my day being in a conversation with what did Anne and Green Gables call it? Kindred spirits. So
For sure.
yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, all of you.
Okay. See you next time.
All right. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.